Hi, I'm Joey from Moos and really excited to have you here to see our presentation on making games that extend kids' TV shows. Really hope you enjoy it, and we'll be here in the chat if you want to ask us questions as it goes along. Happy to answer any questions or just say hi, and we'll see you after the presentation for any other questions you have. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land and community. We pay our respect to them and their cultures, and to the elders both past, present, and emerging. Moos partner with family-focused organisations to solve meaningful problems in delightful ways. We are the family division of a company called Two Bulls, and we've got offices in New York and Melbourne. We have lots of really cool clients that we work with, and in particular, we really do love working with media companies who create positive impact shows for kids, and we love to create games around those shows. Like many digital studios, Moos are a service-based company. So that means that we sell our services instead of selling actual digital products. So we work with some really cool clients, including Sesame Street, PBS Kids, Disney, and more. My background is in kids media as well. I started off working at ABC with ABC Kids online, and then I moved to Sesame Street in New York for a number of years before I moved to Two Bulls, where we created the Two Moos division. And I've just been really loving finding really interesting clients to partner with to create some really interesting projects. So I'm the managing director of Two Moos, and my job is mainly around BD, business development. So I'm the one who finds the clients and wins the work, basically. And I come from a long background working in kids media, but usually on the other side. So on the client side, I came from ABC Kids, Degrassi in Toronto, and then I worked in New York at Sesame Street for a number of years. So I know a lot about managing vendors, but I didn't know anything about being a BD person. So when I first started off at Two Moos and they advised me this is what I was going to be doing, I actually hated the thought of business development, and I thought it was all businessmen in suits and just sucking up to people, and thought it was not for me. But turns out it's actually super creative and really, really fun. So while the kids media industry is very large, it's also, from a networking perspective, very small. So everyone pretty much knows or knows of everyone in the industry in a way, and it's a really lovely group of people. So when I moved over from Sesame Street to start the Two Moos division, one of the first jobs that we won through RFP process was a Sesame Street job, and it was called Grover's Block Party. And one of the great things about that project was that I've always been really interested in prototypes and innovation technology, and one of the reasons I love working at Two Moos and Two Bulls is that we have some really great engineers and artists and creatives, and it's one of those places where you can throw anything at us and we can pretty much build it, and it's really exciting. So we worked with Sesame very closely to create this experience that combined second screen technology, augmented reality, and a 3D procedurally generated Grover to allow kids to create this experience where they were playing with actual physical blocks, and they didn't have someone telling them what to do. Grover was on this TV screen, more like a parent looking at what the kids were doing with the blocks and actually understanding what they were doing, and he would be commenting. Say if they put the letters CAT together, 3D Grover would be like, "Oh, I see you've spelt the word cat," and then a video of a cat would appear. So it's a really good way of using really interesting technology and traditional toys to look at how you can help kids learn and have fun in new ways. One of my favourite games we ever made was the app for Ready Jet Go. So in Ready Jet Go Space Explorer, kids can explore the solar system and visit planets and stars and constellations with Jet and his friends. And but they can also so if kids move their device around and pointed it at a star in the sky, they would actually have one of the characters say what star that was. So we had to record thousands of pieces of content to get a lot of the stars and planets and constellation facts with the character called Face 9000. But also we had mini games like a hide and seek mini game where you could actually move your phone around to try and find jet in the night sky. And finally, you could color in constellations on your phone, and then when you lifted up your phone to look at the night sky to point it at the constellation, it was as if your constellation itself was in color. It was really pretty. So we were really proud of that app. As this was a show for really young kids, we had to really make sure that the way that we taught astronomy was going to be really clear. So that's where we worked pretty closely with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory contact, but we also relied very heavily on the PBS Kids educational advisors. We all worked really hard together to take these educational focuses to create really meaningful and engaging games for them.
When starting out with a client that has an already established IP, the first thing that we do is research. We focus on 3 things when doing this: the source IP, other IPs that the client has, and other games the client has that are of similar size. We do this not only to understand the product and what we're building, but also to show the client that we understand and value their IP, while setting expectations internally around what's expected and what we need to build. With this valuable information at hand, we then have an initial spitball session amongst the producers and the team itself that's going to be developing the product. We start throwing ideas around and start seeing what we can do for initial client discussions that goes into the inception that we have with them. But basically, we really drill down in defining what kind of ideas based on the RFP that we can use to ensure success around the product and the goals that the client has. When the inception starts, we generally aim to have the team present with the client, as they're the experts in their field. This means that we can get the entire team on board without needing to double handle information, but also have them there to solve thoughts, ideas, implementation pipelines, anything being defined through the inception process that could raise questions as it's being brought up. So what happens next during an inception? Well, we first identify the key goals of the product. For example, most games centered around kids' TV shows are looking for something educational. Then again, the client could be just wanting to make something groundbreaking in the tech space to really make their IP shine. So it's incredibly important that this context is set before we begin bringing in any solutions that we've discussed. That being said, the team is also ready to throw out any other preconceived ideas if necessary, because sometimes, the initial ideas you have don't really work out with what the client actually has in mind, as opposed to what was in their RFP. As the key goals are solidified, ideation can then begin. Predefined ideas that fit the mold are presented or modified by the producer, and those are the ideas that were originally brought together by the team. But as they're presented, it's made very clear that they're not final. They can't be final, obviously. As with any product, it's going to grow and mold through the development process. But it's important that that context gets given to the client so that they understand what's coming and expectations are set. The core goal of the inception is not to fully define the solution, but instead to create a solid foundation for the direction in which the product is going to take over its development lifecycle. As the team work back and forth, their core goal is to define a loose product definition that will fit the budget, timeline, and achieve the goals from the first part of the inception. Once a few ideas are settled on, the team will break for a few days, allowing the client to consider their options. On reconvening the inception, further discussions are had to refine and finalize down to a single idea. It is then that the team goes away and defines the expected timeline for the product's development. They build out the expected design in the form of a game design document. That document is then sent to the client for approval, and over a series of a week or two, final iterations and refinements are done to the document, locking in the initial expected design. At that point, the team is ready to start development.
Hi, my name is Bertrand, and I am the engineer manager at Moos. Today I'll be covering the engineering side of this presentation about making games that extends TV shows. So let's talk about technology. In this case, I want to talk to you about the inequality of technology. See, if you make a game that extended kids' TV shows, well, odds are that TV show is being watched by a wide range of people from all sorts of different socioeconomic background. So same thing needs to apply for your game. You need to cater for everyone. And that means that you need to cater for people who have the best and latest of computers and hardware, and the opposite end of the spectrum where people have very old and not very good computers because they just can't afford it. And that's something that happens within a country, but also all over the world. Not every country has the same access to technology as other countries. And sometimes wealth isn't even the issue. It's actually more also a cultural thing. For instance, in Australia, it's quite common at school to be given a laptop or a tablet. So if you want to make, you know, in an educational game, for Australian audience, it's great. Like, because you almost guarantee you're going to find some kind of electronic device in a classroom. But if you want to do the same thing in France, for instance, it's a lot less common. They tend to keep technology out of the classroom. So you got to think about all these things, the how powerful it is, the type of devices, and things like that. So here's something that we do a lot here at Moos, and I advise you to do the same if you have the same requirements as we do. Is actually web games. We tend to do a lot of web games because it is the common denominator on all those things. Your phone can play a web game, your tablet can play a web game, your PC can play a web game. And we actually use something called Cocos Creator. We do use Unity a lot as well to make apps, or for targeted console, something like that. But more often than not, we have to use something less beefy because we target quite a few range of devices, and also computers, not just devices as well. And when it comes to inequality, well, it's not just about the hardware, but it's also access to internet. It's something that we take for granted, but clearly the recent, pandemic showed us that not everyone has the same access to the internet, and it's causing some problems. Take into account those remote communities, or even places where internet isn't affordable and very slow. So make sure that if you make a game like that, just make sure it doesn't need to talk to the internet too much, or at all if possible. It can be hard, but do it. And even even if it's a struggle to just deliver the game, so just imagine if your game has to connect to the web. It's going to be a nightmare. And I know I mentioned web game before, but think about the web game, the web browser as like your device. Like it's something that you download once and then it's cached and you can use it. So web games still work in that context. So next, I want to talk about accessibility. And I know a lot of you already think about that, but in this scenario, I want to emphasize the fact that you are making a game for kids. Remember the kids, they're not adults, they can be very young, they might have very small hands, or they might be short, you got to think about those kind of things. Um, make sure that the way they interact with the game is easy even for kids. Keep the interactions simple and reduce the number of clicks. Um, do a few things like we like to do this thing called like sticky drag, where you actually click on something and then it follows the mouse, and then it will follow the mouse until you click again. Because some kids find it hard to actually, hold a click and move the mouse. Speaking of that, just favor mouse over keyboard. Try to avoid having too many keys or even use them at all, especially if you, like us, we often do a web game that can be played on a computer and a mobile device. Yeah, you'd be surprised the kind of thing that, you know, we have to change because they're kids. Like, just thinking even if you do an AR game, make sure that the distance is appropriate between what you're trying to target because, well, they're kids, they're small. there's things to help with accessibility, like try to keep things simple with more imagery instead of text, and provide caption for voiceovers and things like that. I mean, I'm sure your designers and artists would have thought about this, but it's good. It's good to keep in mind, especially programmers. We can work on helping with color blindness, for instance. We can try to add some settings or shaders that can help with that. Even maybe change your font to use like a dyslexia friendly font, for instance. When it comes to accessibility features, actually, keep an eye on the built-in features that already exist in the platform they're using. Like consoles and computers and phones come with a lot of accessibility features already, so you don't always need to do them from scratch. You can reuse what's already there. So, keep that in mind. And finally, the last topic I want to talk about was privacy. The game now can be played in lots of computers and mobile devices, and it's perfectly accessible for kids. But now you need to make sure that the kids are safe while using your application. Luckily, there's quite a few laws out there that focus on that. Different countries have different laws as well, and they change according to which age they are and things like that. There's laws like GDPR and COPPA, among others. You could fill an entire presentation just about these laws. It's no kids' play, trust me. But to keep it short, these laws are there to protect people's privacy, people's data and privacy, and some of them even target more for kids to make sure they're safe while using those applications. But as a rule of thumb, try to avoid collecting data. The less data you collect, the better you are, and especially don't share them or avoid sharing them with third parties. If you do, that's fine-ish. You just need to make sure that you check with them what their policies are, and do they share also the data that you share with them. Mind you, these days, a lot of those companies also have a system to make sure that you flag that your user is a kid, and they will do things differently. They won't share as much, well, they won't share at all technically. Who knows what they do with their data. So it's fine, but just be very, very mindful of all the data that you're collecting and sharing. So yeah, so this is the kind of thing that the engineers have to really think hard about when making a game for kids. And I'm sure you already think about those things, but again, just wanted to emphasize how important all those things are.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Brent. I'm one of the artists here at Moos, and today I'll be talking to you about some of the design decisions that we make for our kids' games. It should be noted that a bunch of these decisions are just as relevant to make your game more accessible, but some of these are specific for the kind of kids' audience that we're working with. So we made games for a full gamut of clients, some small, some large, with various levels of educational goals, but we have to consider that our end client is our players. So to do that, we need to step into our audience's shoes. Our games may be played in a classroom setting or downloaded by their parents. Especially for the 3 to 5-year-old range, they're probably not on the latest hardware. This is definitely the case for people in school settings. Many of our web-based games still run on iPad 2s, for example. It is also a fair assumption that this is one of the small handful of games that they've ever played. So having a good tutorialization system is a must. And if there's one piece of information that I'm going to give you to check out after this talk, it would be to check out the Wcag 2.1 compliance guidelines. It is a resource that allows you to accommodate for various disabilities, including blindness, deafness, and physical disabilities. In particular, the most useful that I've found is the color contrast checker, which is used for text. It compares two hex values, one background color, one foreground color, and then gives it a ranking between fail all the way through to AAA. AAA is the most compliant, whereas fail is the least compliant. In particular, this allows you to determine whether or not your text is going to be readable enough for your audience and has been integrated into my entire design process. The next biggest win is color blindness. Kids at this age may not even know that they're colorblind, so having games that rely solely on their perception of color should be avoided. You can test out a lot of your mockups by going in Photoshop, by going to View, then Proof Setup, and there are various color blindness options that you should be able to check out. We've implemented this into many of our games, including TPT Treehouse Trouble, which we've had to then make changes to our own designs to make sure that they are accommodating to colorblind kids. So to reiterate, your kids are likely going to be using old hardware, either as hand-me-downs or in many cases they'll be using a Chromebook. I was able to go to a teachers conference a couple of years ago, and when I was there I was able to check out what hardware they were using, and in many cases they were still using 10-year-old iPads. We also have to account for various devices that they're going to be using, so they're probably not going to be playing in front of a computer all the time. Many of them still are playing on mobile devices as well as on tablets. So when designing your screens, it is best to design for your smallest screen first, and to build in a safe area for the rest of your devices that you're going to be accommodating for. So for many of our games, we design for mobile first, as well as we design in a 4x3 safe area in all of our games. So that just makes sure that all of our interactive elements exist within that 4x3 space. Therefore, that if it ever needs to kind of get cropped off, or if we ever need to scale the whole experience up, it means that they can still play our game without any issues. Now, another general accessibility features in our kids' games is subtitles. This is especially helpful for crowded rooms, such as the classroom, where having 30 different monitors playing the same experience over and over again is probably going to be a hindrance more than a feature. Now, conversely, an unfortunate byproduct of our audience being so young is that many of them can't read. For those players, we recommend having a voice track to accompany any kind of subtitled information, or really any written text at all. So that way they will be able to listen to it, as opposed to relying on the children to be able to read. So briefly going over some of the text specs, the smallest size that I designed for is generally 14 point. I rarely need to go this small, however, as most of the written text that I have is generally between the 18 to 24 range. Also, when choosing fonts, there are a couple of general rules to make your text a bit more readable for kids. Generally, a font with a larger X height is considered more readable, and fonts that match the style that they learn through school is going to increase legibility as well. So I would avoid any kind of font that has a double-storied A or G. Also, for headings, you may also consider just going all caps, as they learn these letter forms earlier in their life as opposed to the lowercase forms. So when designing your buttons, as a general rule, you should be designing them to be larger for children, since they have less fine-tuned motor controls and less experience using a tool like a mouse. Having a larger hitbox is very beneficial, as well as having generous padding between each button also helps avoid missed clicks. As we're designing for mobile devices, it should be noted that we can't rely on hover states to identify areas that are clickable. If your players do become confused as to what to do next, it might be worth animating the button that will lead them to the next step to assist distracted players, such as me. Such as me. And now to logins. So kids rarely have an email, and since we don't want to store their personal information due to COPPA compliance as well as GDPR, we don't want to store any of their personal information. So many times we rely on either a parental login, or for school products, we rely on them kind of generating a room that their students can then access via a link or a QR code. We've implemented this on many products that require a license in order to access their product. In particular, one that we've done recently would be the Alana Madeline Foundation, in which a teacher can generate a room, and then using that link, they're also able to then send that link to their students so they can play the game. And that's it for me. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. And now I will hand off to Harry.
As the product progresses through its development lifecycle, maintaining collaboration with the client is key. Obfuscating development processes rarely ever work when it comes to the client. In fact, one finds that being open and bringing the client along with you through the journey of development makes the client an ally rather than an external entity. This is super important to maintain the malleability of the product. And obviously for most people who have done production before really understand the need for that, especially when things don't work out the way you're expecting them to work. Development, of course, is aimed to go exactly as planned, but sometimes discovery can rear its head and some of the quoted development timelines are blown out. Or the expected velocity of a team to reach the defined feature set just isn't quite there. It's not at the speed that it needs. So by maintaining transparency with the client, you're able to involve them in the narrative and often have them make the key realizations or make the decisions to reduce scope or refocus efforts to ensure a product is delivered that they're ultimately happy with. But as products get bigger and include higher levels of complexity, separate weekly calls for reviews and involvement in stand-ups are included. Backlog refinement is dependent on the type of engagement. A waterfall engagement will not include backlog refinement, as the backlog is defined from the start. All acceptance criteria is locked in. Whereas in an agile engagement, backlog refinements are the key touch points in being able to include the necessary malleability for delivery of the product to the expected date. These are generally the best times for the product owner and the producer to define the next sprint and expected outcomes based on the current state of the product. What I mean by that is if the product's running ahead, well, maybe the product owner is able to fit a few more things in that they've been looking to try and get in through polish. If the project isn't running ahead and is lagging a little bit behind, well, key decisions around what will be biggest bang for buck and what brings the most value or what the product specifically needs can be applied with the understanding that not everything is necessarily going to get in, but the key features are. We also build in an expected feedback loop with the client around assets. All assets are sent to the client for approval before implementation. This is incredibly important as clients generally have rules around how their IP needs to be handled, and using their style guides sometimes isn't enough. Sometimes it just doesn't portray exactly what they're thinking, or they've missed one or two things, and those kinds of style guides are based around TV or movies, not necessarily how their characters or their IP is going to be used in games. Another thing we ensure we maintain to promote quality with the client is kid testing. We ensure that each game has a period where testing with external children is set up for feedback around expected use by the targeted demographic. This not only ensures great feedback for the betterment of the product as a whole, but ensures value is shown to the client of what we're creating, and generally leads to better alignment towards the end of the product. Most kid testing is done over a week, sometimes two, sometimes it's split into two separate segments. It generally occurs after beta or after Goldmaster candidate. Then over those periods, those 1 week periods, the team will generally go to tools down, namely to budget save and allow that budget and timeline to be applied for the necessary feedback that comes from the kid testing. By aligning through this entire process, we are better able to ensure not only an understanding of what the product at the end is going to look like and what we're ultimately building out to, but we also get to keep a happy client who is very much willing to work with us in the future because they understand the process, they're involved in the process, and they're able to see active changes around the process by their interaction. I would definitely promote everyone who does client work to collaborate as much as they can with their clients on any product that they're working on.
Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed our talk, and we'll be around to answer any questions you have in the Q&A section, and we would love to see you there.